I never thought much about the smell of garlic and butter until Thorn moved into the apartment across from mine. That probably sounds ridiculous, starting a story about falling in love with a sentence about cooking smells, but that's exactly how it happened. I'm Marcus, by the way, and I've lived in this building for 2 years now. It's one of those older places with narrow hallways and thin walls where you can hear your neighbors arguing about whose turn it is to buy toilet paper. Nothing special, but the rent was decent and it was close to the marketing firm where I worked. I kept to myself mostly, the way you do in cities. Not in the hallway, hold the elevator door, never actually learn anyone's name. Then Thorn arrived on a humid Saturday in June, and suddenly I was noticing things I'd walked past 1,000 times before. The way afternoon light came through the hallway window, the sound of footsteps on old hardwood, the fact that my door and his door faced each other like quotation marks around all the words we hadn't yet spoken. The first time I saw him, he was wrestling a bookshelf through the narrow hallway, swearing softly under his breath. He had dark, curly hair that fell into his eyes, and the kind of lean build that comes from actually using your body, not from a gym membership you feel guilty about. I was coming back from the bodega with my usual weekend breakfast of coffee and a bagel I'd eat while scrolling through my phone, pretending I had plans. Need help? The words came out before I'd really decided to say them. He looked up, pushing hair from his forehead with the back of his wrist, and smiled. I've got it. But thank you. I'm just learning that furniture dimensions and hallway dimensions are mortal enemies. His voice had this warm quality to it, like honey dissolving in tea. I found myself smiling back without meaning to. You're in 312? Yeah, just moved from Portland. I'm Thorn. Marcus, I'm in 311. Welcome to the building. Thanks. I promise I'm a quiet neighbor. Well, except for cooking. I cook a lot. I laughed and said something forgettable about how cooking smells were better than some alternatives, and then I went into my apartment and ate my bagel and tried to figure out why my heart was beating faster than usual. It was just a normal interaction, a neighbor being neighborly. Except I kept replaying the way he'd smiled, the precise tone of his voice, the casual confidence in how he'd moved. I'd known I was gay since high school, but I'd also gotten very good at not thinking about it too hard. I'd had a boyfriend in college that lasted 6 months before we both admitted we were together more out of convenience than actual feeling. Since then, I'd been on maybe a dozen first dates that never became second dates, usually because I'd spent the entire evening being polite instead of present. My therapist said I had intimacy issues. I said I was just busy with work. We were both probably right. But something about Thorn unsettled the careful equilibrium I'd built. Maybe it was the name itself, unexpected and sharp, like the person wearing it. Over the next few days, I found myself hyper-aware of sounds from across the hall, his door opening and closing, music playing softly, the kind of indie folk that sounds like it's being performed in a cabin in the woods. And yes, cooking. The first time I smelled it, I was working from home on a Wednesday, halfway through a tedious presentation about brand positioning. Suddenly, this incredible aroma drifted under my door, rich and savory with garlic and herbs, and something else I couldn't quite identify. My stomach growled even though I'd eaten lunch an hour ago. I got up and opened my door, not really sure what I was doing. Thorn's door was propped open with a doorstop shaped like a hedgehog. I could see into his apartment, which was already more lived in than mine, despite him being there less than a week. Plants on the windowsill. Art prints leaning against walls waiting to be hung. Books stacked in precarious towers. And Thorn himself in the small kitchen, visible from the doorway, stirring something in a pan. Completely absorbed. He must have sensed me standing there because he looked up. Oh, hey Marcus. Sorry, is it too much? I always forget that smells travel in apartments. No, it's amazing. What are you making? Chicken piccata. I left the door open because the hallway always smells like stale carpet and sadness. Figured I'd improve the ambience. He grinned. Want to come in? I made way too much as usual. I should have said no. I had work to finish. I barely knew this person, but I found myself walking across the hallway in my socks and old sweatpants, suddenly conscious that I hadn't showered since morning and probably looked like exactly what I was. Someone who'd been staring at a laptop screen for 6 hours straight. His apartment smelled incredible, like walking into a restaurant you can't quite afford. He handed me a glass of white wine without asking if I wanted one. And somehow, that felt exactly right. We sat at his small table by the window, and he served the chicken with pasta and a salad he'd apparently just thrown together, and it was absurdly good. Where did you learn to cook like this? I asked. My mom. She's Italian, like actually from Italy, not just my great-grandfather came from Sicily. Italian. She has very strong opinions about food. I called her last week and mentioned I'd made carbonara with cream, and I thought she was going to disown me. I laughed. What's wrong with cream in carbonara? He put his hand over his heart like I'd wounded him. Marcus. No. It's eggs and cheese and pasta water. That's it. Adding cream is like, I don't know, putting ketchup on a good steak. I put ketchup on steak. We can't be friends anymore. I'm sorry. It was nice knowing you. But he was smiling, and I was smiling, and something in my chest felt lighter than it had in months. We talked while we ate, the kind of easy conversation that usually takes weeks to develop. He told me about Portland, about working as a freelance graphic designer, about how he'd moved here because his best friend lived in Brooklyn and had been begging him to come east for years. I told him about my job, about growing up in Ohio, about how I'd always meant to explore the city more, but somehow never did. We should fix that, he said. I'm very good at forcing people to have experiences. It's one of my most annoying qualities. What are the others? I sing in the shower, loudly, and I have opinions about Oxford commas, and I can't watch movies without providing commentary. The Oxford comma is essential, and anyone who disagrees is wrong. Oh, thank God. I was worried I'd have to rescind my dinner invitation. My heart did something complicated. This was a dinner invitation. Well, it started as, do you want some food? But I'm retroactively upgrading it. Is that okay? Yeah, I said, and meant it more than I'd meant anything in a while. That's okay. After that, it became a thing. Not every night, but often enough that I started listening for sounds of cooking. Started hoping I'd smell garlic and butter and wine drifting under my door. Sometimes I'd knock and he'd wave me in. Sometimes he'd knock on my door with a plate already prepared. We'd eat and talk, and somehow hours would pass without me noticing. I learned that Thorne was compulsively early to everything. That he collected vintage National Geographic magazines. That he'd been in love once with a guy named Adrian who'd broken his heart by moving to Singapore for work without asking Thorne to come. I told him about my college boyfriend, about the dates that never went anywhere, about how sometimes I felt like I was watching my own life from a distance instead of actually living it. That's loneliness, he said quietly. We were sitting on his couch, our second bottle of wine mostly empty between us. Not the being alone part, the watching yourself part. I felt like that in Portland the last year, like I was just going through motions. Do you still feel like that? He looked at me, and something in his expression made my breath catch. No, not since I moved here. I should have said something, should have acknowledged what was clearly happening between us. But I was scared in a way I couldn't quite name. So instead I made a joke about the wine going to my head and said I should probably get to bed. I saw something flicker across his face. Disappointment, maybe. But he just smiled and walked me the 8 feet across the hall to my own door, like we'd travelled miles together. That night, I lay in bed staring at my ceiling and finally admitted to myself what I'd been avoiding for weeks. I was falling for Thorn, had maybe already fallen, and it terrified me because I knew how to be alone and I knew how to be casually involved with someone, but I had no idea how to be the kind of open and vulnerable that real love seemed to require. The next morning, I almost convinced myself to create some distance. Be friendly, but busy. Let whatever this was fade into just neighbours who sometimes eat together. But then I opened my door to leave for work, and there was a small container on my doormat with a note in Thorn's handwriting. Blueberry muffins. Because you mentioned you usually skip breakfast and that's a crime. Have a good day, Marcus. I stood there in the hallway, holding muffins and feeling something crack open in my chest. And I knew I was in trouble. The good kind of trouble. The kind that changes everything. Work was impossible that day. I kept checking my phone like a teenager, hoping for a text, even though we hadn't actually exchanged numbers yet, which seemed absurd given how much time we spent together. During my lunch break, I did something I never did. I left the office and went to a bookstore and bought a cookbook. Not just any cookbook, but an Italian one, the kind with glossy photos and detailed instructions. I had no idea what I was doing. I'd lived on takeout and frozen meals for 2 years. But I wanted to try. When I got home that evening, I could hear music from Thorn's apartment, but his door was closed. I felt an actual pang of disappointment. I went into my own place and stared at the cookbook and felt ridiculous. What was I doing? I couldn't cook. I'd burn water. But I opened it anyway, found a recipe for pasta aglio e olio that claimed to be simple, and decided to at least try. An hour later, my kitchen was a disaster zone. I'd burned the first batch of garlic, overcooked the pasta, and somehow gotten olive oil on the ceiling. But the second attempt was actually edible. Maybe not good, but edible. And I'd done it myself. I took a breath, plated some of the pasta in one of my nicer bowls, and before I could talk myself out of it, walked across the hall and knocked. Thorn opened the door in paint-stained jeans and an old t-shirt, hair messy, and he looked so casually beautiful that I almost forgot why I was there. I made pasta, I said, holding out the bowl like an offering. It's probably terrible, but you keep feeding me, and I wanted to return the favor. His expression went soft in a way that made my stomach flip. You cooked for me. I attempted to cook. The results are questionable. Marcus. He said my name like it meant something. Come in. We sat at his table and he ate my mediocre pasta and told me it was delicious. And I knew he was lying, but I also knew he meant it somehow. He asked me about the cookbook, and I admitted I'd bought it that day and his whole face lit up. I could teach you, he said, if you want. Cooking, I mean. It's more fun with 2 people anyway. I'd like that. So that became our new thing. A few nights a week, I'd come over and Thorn would teach me to cook. He was patient in a way I hadn't expected, guiding my hands when I couldn't get the motion right for kneading dough, standing close enough that I could feel the warmth of him, smell whatever soap he used, notice the small scar on his forearm and wonder about its story. The touching was casual at first. A hand on my shoulder. Fingers correcting my grip on a knife. But it began to linger. To mean something. And the air between us started to feel charged. Like the moment before a storm breaks. One night we were making risotto, which apparently requires constant stirring and attention. Thorn was behind me, his hand over mine on the wooden spoon, guiding the motion. You have to be patient with it, he said softly, his breath warm against my ear. You can't rush it. I wasn't sure we were talking about risotto anymore. I turned my head slightly, and he was right there, close enough that I could see gold flecks in his brown eyes. Neither of us moved. The risotto bubbled quietly on the stove. My heart was so loud I was sure he could hear it. "Marcus," he said, barely a whisper. "Yeah? I need to tell you something." "Okay. I really want to kiss you right now. I've wanted to for weeks. But I need to know if that's okay. If you want that too." My throat was tight. "I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of wanting it too much. Of this being real and not knowing how to do that." His hand came up to my face, gentle, giving me every chance to pull away. "I'm scared too. But I think we could be scared together. If you want." I did want. God, I wanted. So I closed the small distance between us and kissed him. And it felt like everything I'd been avoiding and everything I'd been looking for at the same time. He tasted like wine and the lemon we'd used for the risotto. His hand slid into my hair, and I made a sound I'd be embarrassed about later, but in that moment didn't care about at all. When we broke apart, we were both breathing hard. The risotto was definitely burning. "Shit," Thorne said, laughing, reaching to turn off the stove. "See, this is why cooking is dangerous. Worth it, though." He looked at me with so much warmth I felt it in my bones. "Yeah, definitely worth it." We ordered pizza and ate it on his couch and kissed between slices and talked about what this meant, what we wanted. He told me he'd been hoping since the day we met. I told him I'd been terrified since the same day. He said that was okay. That we could go slow. That he wasn't going anywhere. "I'm not good at this," I admitted. "At being open. At letting someone in." "Then we'll practice. I'll leave my door open, and you can decide when you're ready to walk through." Over the following weeks, I learned what it meant to let someone matter, to text good morning and mean it, to make plans days in advance instead of living in the moment, to say, "I missed you," after a long workday, to stay over at his place and wake up with his arm around me and feel safe instead of trapped. He met my friends and charmed them effortlessly. I met his best friend who'd lured him to New York and understood immediately why Thorne had come. We cooked together and learned each other's rhythms. We had our first fight about something stupid, my tendency to shut down when stressed, and worked through it instead of walking away. 3 months in, I still got nervous sometimes. Still had moments where the vulnerability felt like too much. But Thorne was patient. He'd learned to read my silences, to know when I needed space and when I needed to be pulled out of my own head. One Saturday morning, I woke up in his bed to the smell of coffee and bacon. I found him in the kitchen, his door propped open with that hedgehog doorstop, music playing softly. "What are you doing?" I asked, wrapping my arms around him from behind. "Making the hallway smell better. It's kind of my thing." I kissed the back of his neck. "I love you." He turned in my arms, eyes bright. "Say that again." "I love you, Thorne. I love you too. Have for a while now." "I know. I'm sorry it took me so long to say it. You're worth waiting for, Marcus. You're worth everything." We ate breakfast in his apartment with the door open, letting the smell of coffee and contentment drift into the hallway. And I thought about how I'd lived across from an empty apartment for 2 years, keeping to myself, playing it safe. How Thorne had arrived and left his door open and changed everything without even trying. How love had found me in the smell of garlic and butter, in shared meals and patient hands, in someone brave enough to say what they wanted and gentle enough to wait while I found the courage to want it too. My door and his door still face each other like quotation marks, but now they frame a different story. One where I learned that being scared and being brave aren't opposites. Where I discovered that home isn't a place you retreat to, but a person you let in. Where every day I choose to walk across that hallway, and every day he's there. Door open, making the whole world smell better.